In this episode, we take the operational threats, events, vulnerabilities, and impacts you identified and turn them into an evaluation discipline that works in production, where conditions change, time is limited, and decisions must be made in ways that can be defended later. Operational risk evaluation is not the same as a one-time assessment done before a system goes live, because production introduces continuous signals, frequent change, and real consequences when you get priorities wrong. The purpose is to judge which risks require immediate action, which risks can be scheduled, which risks are acceptable under current criteria, and which risks have changed enough that prior decisions must be revisited. Tracking posture changes is how you keep the evaluation connected to reality, because even a well-designed system drifts over time as dependencies evolve and people find workarounds. Documenting decisions is what turns operational judgment into organizational memory and accountability, so decisions do not evaporate when staff rotate or when an incident raises questions about why certain risks were accepted. The skill here is not being alarmist or dismissive. It is being consistent, evidence-based, and clear about trade-offs, uncertainty, and ownership. When you can evaluate, track, and document calmly in production, you build trust that risk management is helping mission outcomes rather than slowing them down. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Operational risk evaluation begins with recognizing that production provides both better evidence and more urgent constraints than design time analysis. You have real logs, real incident history, real change records, and real patterns of user behavior, which allow you to judge likelihood more realistically than hypothetical models. At the same time, production has constraints like uptime commitments, limited maintenance windows, staffing limits, and the need to keep mission workflows moving, which shape what mitigation is feasible. A good evaluation discipline, therefore, uses the evidence production provides while acknowledging the constraints production imposes. Beginners sometimes think evaluation is simply assigning a label like high or low, but operational evaluation must answer a practical question. What do we do next and why? That means you assess likelihood and impact in a way that reflects observed reality, such as whether a class of events is occurring frequently or whether detection is slow for certain pathways. It also means you incorporate control effectiveness as demonstrated in practice, such as whether monitoring actually catches the events you care about and whether recovery processes actually restore service within acceptable time. The evaluation outcome should be a prioritized set of actions and decisions that align with mission and are achievable within operational limits. A useful operational mindset is to treat risk evaluation as a comparison between risk drivers and safety margins, because safety margin is what protects you when things do not go as planned. For example, a system may be exposed to credential attacks, but if authentication controls are strong, privileges are limited, and detection is fast, the safety margin is larger. If privileges are broad, monitoring is inconsistent, and response is slow, the safety margin is smaller, and the same threat becomes more urgent. Operational evaluation looks for where margins are thin, because thin margins are where small events create large impacts. Thin margins also show up as single points of failure, overloaded teams, and brittle procedures that only work when everything is calm. Beginners should learn that risk is not only about the presence of vulnerabilities. It is about whether the system can withstand stress and recover without unacceptable harm. When you evaluate risk through the lens of margin, you naturally prioritize actions that increase resilience, such as improving detection coverage, tightening privileges, or strengthening recovery steps. This approach keeps evaluation grounded and avoids emotional swings driven by headlines. Likelihood evaluation in operations should be tied to exposure and observed event patterns, not to generic threat assumptions. If you regularly see scanning and authentication attempts against an interface, the likelihood of attempts is high, even if successful compromise has not occurred. If you see repeated misconfigurations during routine changes, the likelihood of operational failure events is higher than if changes are rare and tightly controlled. If you have dependencies that have recently experienced outages or delayed patches, the likelihood of impact from dependency issues may rise. Production evidence can also reveal that certain vulnerabilities are effectively contained, such as when a weakness exists but is behind multiple independent controls that make exploitation unlikely. The key is to define what data you are using to justify likelihood judgments, such as incident trends, alert trends, change frequency, and control performance indicators. For beginners, this is an important shift because it shows that likelihood is not a feeling. It is an informed estimate based on conditions and evidence. When the evidence changes, likelihood judgments should change, and that is how posture tracking becomes meaningful. Impact evaluation in operations must connect directly to mission outcomes and to real recovery behavior, because impact is not just the theoretical worst case. If a service outage prevents a mission-critical workflow, impact is high, and the impact rises if recovery is slow or if manual workarounds are limited. If an integrity issue can alter records that drive downstream decisions, impact can be severe even if the system stays online, because incorrect data can silently cause wrong outcomes. If a confidentiality exposure involves regulated data, impact includes not only reputational harm, but also reporting obligations and operational disruption from containment and investigation. Operational impact evaluation should also consider cascading effects, such as one system outage causing backups in dependent processes or one compromised account enabling access to multiple connected services. Beginners should learn to describe impact in terms of what stops working, what becomes untrustworthy, and what must be done to restore trust. This helps leaders prioritize because it speaks the language of outcomes rather than the language of component failure. It also helps teams plan mitigations that reduce impact, such as segmentation, data validation, and recovery rehearsals. Evaluating operational risk also requires judging control effectiveness as it exists in reality, not as it is described in policy. Controls can be present but ineffective if they are misconfigured, inconsistently applied, or overwhelmed by noise. Monitoring is a good example, because having logs is not the same as having usable detection, and having alerts is not the same as having response capacity. Access controls can degrade when privileges accumulate or when exceptions are granted without review. Change controls can degrade when schedules are tight and validation is skipped to meet deadlines. An operational evaluation must therefore include evidence of control behavior, such as how often alerts are triaged, how quickly incidents are contained, and how consistently privileged actions are reviewed. Beginners should understand that control effectiveness is not a moral judgment. It is a practical observation about whether the control produces the outcome it was meant to produce. When controls are weak in practice, risk remains higher even if compliance documents say otherwise. This is why operational evaluation is so important. It keeps risk posture honest. Tracking posture changes is the mechanism that keeps your evaluation from becoming stale, because posture is the current state of risk based on the system's evolving reality. Posture changes can be improvements, such as reduced detection time, tighter access roles, or more reliable recovery, and they can be degradations, such as increased privilege sprawl, reduced monitoring coverage, or growing patch backlog. Posture changes can also be neutral shifts, such as new features that add exposure but also add compensating controls, leaving overall risk similar but different in shape. To track posture, you need to define what signals you will watch, and those signals should align with the risk drivers you identified as most important. For example, if credential abuse is a key risk, you might track authentication anomaly patterns, privileged role counts, and response times for access-related alerts. If integrity is key, you might track data validation failures, change error rates, and incident patterns involving record corruption. Beginners should see that posture tracking is not endless measurement. It is focused measurement tied to decision criteria and mission outcomes. A key part of posture tracking is recognizing when change crosses a threshold that requires reevaluation, because not every change requires leadership attention. Thresholds can be defined by decision criteria, such as any change that affects regulated data, any new external access path, or any increase in downtime beyond acceptable limits. Thresholds can also be defined by trend, such as a steady increase in unresolved vulnerabilities, a steady increase in privileged accounts, or a steady decline in response performance. When a threshold is crossed, prior risk acceptance decisions may no longer hold, because the conditions that made acceptance reasonable have changed. Beginners sometimes see this as backtracking, but it is actually good governance, because it shows decisions are conditional and grounded in reality. Reevaluation is also a chance to adjust mitigations, because sometimes small process fixes can reverse a negative trend before it becomes a major incident. Threshold-based reevaluation is what prevents slow drift into unacceptable risk posture. Documenting decisions is the part that many teams try to minimize, but it is what allows leaders to defend posture and what allows future teams to act consistently. In operations, decisions happen constantly, such as choosing to postpone a patch, choosing to accept a temporary exception, choosing to prioritize an availability fix over a deeper security improvement, or choosing to contain an incident by disabling a feature. If these decisions are not documented, they become invisible, and invisible decisions create hidden risk because no one can see the conditions and rationale that shape them. Documenting does not mean writing long essays. It means capturing the essentials: what was decided, why it was decided, who decided, what evidence was considered, what assumptions were made, what residual risk remains, and when the decision should be revisited. Beginners should see that documentation is part of the control system because it creates accountability and memory. It also reduces repeated debate because teams can refer back to previous reasoning rather than re-arguing from scratch each time. Operational decision documentation must also be written in a way that leaders can defend, which means it should connect to mission outcomes and to risk criteria, not only to technical detail. A leader may need to explain why a risk was accepted temporarily, and the defensible explanation is that the acceptance was bounded by conditions, aligned with mission needs, and accompanied by mitigation plans and monitoring. For example, delaying a patch might be defended if the system cannot tolerate downtime during a critical mission period, but only if compensating controls exist, monitoring is increased, and the patch is scheduled for the earliest safe window. Similarly, granting emergency access might be defended if it was necessary to restore service, but only if it is time-limited, reviewed, and removed promptly. The documentation should make those bounds explicit because unbounded exceptions are hard to defend. Beginners should learn that defensibility comes from showing discipline, clear criteria, clear conditions, clear accountability, and clear follow-up. This is how leaders can stand behind the decision without sounding like they ignored risk. Operational evaluation and documentation also benefit from a balanced tone that avoids both complacency and panic, because tone affects how people respond. If every risk is described as severe, leaders may stop listening and teams may burn out, which increases risk by weakening response capacity. If risks are minimized to avoid conflict, the organization may drift into an unsafe posture and be surprised by events that were predictable. A mature tone describes risk in plain language, acknowledges uncertainty, and explains what will be done next. It also recognizes that operational teams need to keep systems running, so recommendations must respect constraints and propose feasible improvements. Beginners should understand that credibility is built when your evaluations are stable and consistent across time, and when your documentation shows a pattern of thoughtful judgment rather than reactive swings. Credibility is a security asset because teams with credibility can get resources and cooperation before incidents occur. That is one reason posture tracking and decision documentation matter so much in production. As you bring these elements together, the discipline looks like a loop that stays grounded in evidence and mission outcomes. You evaluate operational risk by judging likelihood and impact using production signals and by assessing control effectiveness as it actually performs. You track posture changes by monitoring a focused set of indicators tied to your most important risk drivers and by triggering reevaluation when thresholds or trends indicate meaningful change. You document decisions by capturing what was decided, why, under what conditions, and with what follow-up, so leaders can defend the posture and teams can act consistently. This loop is how operational risk management becomes a living practice rather than a quarterly ritual. It reduces both sudden surprises and slow drift, because it turns operational reality into structured decisions and structured decisions into accountable action. When you master this approach, you can help a production system stay aligned with mission outcomes while remaining honest about residual risk, And that is exactly what effective security engineering looks like in the real world.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.